Game of the World Tree Chapter 979 to Chapter 982. Ahem, be serious. So, as you can see, this is my entire plan to resurrect the World Tree. Furthermore, when I chose to carry out the World Tree project, I also thought about the future of mankind. Since we are going to create a new world, shouldn't mankind improve as well? Mankind's basic genes are too weak. Even with extraordinary awakening, most humans can only live for a few hundred years. If that's the case, can I use the World Tree's power to create a body more suitable for extraordinary powers while I resurrect the World Tree? A longer lifespan, more powerful extraordinary talents, and of course, a more perfect body and a more beautiful appearance. Hee. After all, I'm obsessed with looks. Seeing this, I think you have some guesses about something else. That's right. The race of elves was also designed by me and the super AI. Rather than elves, it's better to call them the new humans I envisioned. Humans have short lifespans and extremely weak extraordinary abilities, but if we can create a new race with the World Tree's laws as the foundation, we might be able to create a better species. That's the elves. Haha. In my imagination, when everyone recovers in the future, we might be able to use the bodies of elves as our bodies. Of course, that's not within the scope of my responsibility. After all, from a certain perspective, it's more like my personal hobby and personal property. Sometimes, I'm also confused about whether my thinking is right or not. After all, if it's only a genetic evolution from humans to extraordinaires, then from humans to elves, it's almost as if they're a different species. I don't seem to have the right to make this decision for everyone. Now, I'm leaving the choice of the future in your hands. Just take it that I'm trying to avoid responsibility. Your Holiness Eve, since you've become a true World Tree, it's not difficult for you to create things. The path of mankind in the future will be decided by you. I know that you've become a World Tree. Theoretically speaking, you're no longer representing mankind, but the entire new universe. However, considering your relationship with mankind, I still hope that you can take care of the people of the United Nations in Blue Star, and this is my only wish. Finally, I will give you another gift as a congratulatory gift for your transcendence. The true origin of the World Tree is also related to this. After reading the letter, you can directly ask the Super AI for it. Now that you have become its new owner, everything here belongs to you. Your Majesty Eve, transcendence is not the end, but the starting point. The road ahead is long. I hope you can take care of yourself and lead the new world to a more glorious future. The letter finally came to an end. Eve heaved a long sigh of relief. Her emotions were like a turbulent sea. Although he had long been mentally prepared and had a vague premonition, he still couldn't help but feel complicated when he learned of his true origin. However, the past was the past. Since she had transcended and become the complete World Tree, then, she was the World Tree, Eve Yggdrasil Hill. Next, it was time for him to walk his own path. However, the elves are the new humans created by you and Neo? Since they are new humans, why did you design them with such a silly and sweet personality? She couldn't help but turn her head and look at the professor on the other side. Her face was full of suppressed desire to complain. The professor smiled slightly. Your Majesty Eve, the original personality of the elves was the most suitable in the universe of seekers at that time. This is the result of my repeated calculations, and it is also the most reasonable choice. Why? Eve raised her eyebrows. The professor continued. Your Majesty Eve, you should know that the purpose of all my procedures is for the continuation of the Blue Star United Nations, so, all threats that may threaten the survival of the Blue Star United Nations must be controlled. Eve was slightly taken aback and instantly understood what the other party meant. There was no other reason. The elf's potential was too strong. If it wasn't for the silly and sweet personality that was set to stand aloof from worldly affairs, the elves would have dominated the entire universe of seekers. They might even have become another race that threatened the Blue Star United Nations and the Neoverse universe. In fact, even with the silly and sweet personality, the elves had dominated the entire universe of seekers for tens of thousands of years in the history of seekers. Later, when the players had the bodies of the elves, they were even more invincible in the universe of seekers. Of course, the players were not the same. For them, this was just a game. They could still be resurrected with the buff of the fourth calamity. But even without the courage that the identity of the fourth calamity brought to the players, based on the changes that the players had brought to the elves over the years, and the living conditions of the reincarnated players among the elves' bodies and human souls were enough to become an extremely bug-like existence. Humans had many, many shortcomings. But at the same time, humans also had many, many advantages. They were united, confident, strong in their hearts, and had a strong curiosity about everything. In order to achieve their life values and ideals, they were even willing to give up everything. Not only that, at this moment, Eve thought of more. From this perspective, perhaps from the moment the elves dominated the universe of seekers, this super-artificial intelligence named Professor had already begun to limit the power of the elves. The guardian of the stars, Rigdal, listened to his command. And the Lord of Eternity, was said to have regarded the guardian of the stars, Rigdal, who was good at prophecy, as his military advisor. If this was the case, so, the decline of the elves was also caused by you using the hands of the human gods? Eve could not help but ask. Your Holiness Eve, you misunderstood me. In my calculations, the elf's original personality is no longer a threat to the Blue Star United Nations. The real cause of the elves' disaster was the human clones in the universe of seekers, and the ambition of the gods they believed in. Professor, replied Roland. Eve nodded slowly. Fortunately. If the super-artificial intelligence's answer was that the decline of the elves was also planned by it and Neo, then, she, who had become the guardian of the elves, did not know how to face it. From your tone, you don't seem to care much about the humans in the universe of seekers? Eve's heart suddenly moved. Of course, my program is only set to protect the citizens of the United Nations of Blue Star. The elves and humans in the universe of seekers are not within my scope of protection. Professor continued to answer with a smile. Eve nodded slightly. Neo's purpose was all for the humans in the United Nations of Blue Star. The same went for Professor. In order to achieve the final goal, they would choose to do all they could, even by hook or by crook. In this regard, Eve had nothing to say. After all, strictly speaking, she was also a beneficiary of this plan. She sighed slightly and put away the letter. At the same time, she accepted Neo's request to protect the survivors of the United Nations of Blue Star. No, in fact, even without Neo's request, she would still do this. Even if everything was within the plan of Neo and the super-artificial intelligence, her growth was inseparable from the support of the Blue Star players. In a sense, she was indebted to the sleeping survivors of the United Nations of Blue Star. Of course, there was also the familiarity brought by the memory. Although this memory was fake, for Eve, this memory was her spiritual sustenance for a long time. Your Majesty Eve, do you want to see the gift that Neo left for you? Professor asked. Eve nodded. Please come with me. Professor said with a smile. Then, he turned around and walked toward the research hall with an illusory electronic projection. Eve followed and soon returned to the hall. Arriving in front of the electronic screen in the hall, Professor paused slightly. With his movements, the image of the universe of seekers projected on the electronic screen suddenly changed into a deep darkness. This is, Eve's eyes focused. This is the current universe. Professor replied. Then, he gently tapped on the screen, and the image suddenly zoomed in. A coordinate appeared, and there, a looming wormhole could be seen. Wormhole? Eve was slightly taken aback. But soon, her eyes focused. The universe of Blue Star was already dead. In theory, only the galaxy where the World Tree was located relied on the dark energy shield and the power of laws that did not belong to the universe of Blue Star to be protected. Everything else, including the black hole, had been destroyed. But now, in the deep darkness, she could see a wormhole. There was only one answer. That was, this wormhole also had laws and energy that did not belong to the universe of Blue Star, and even higher-level laws and energy. According to the records left behind, Eve knew that wormholes were supernatural channels that connected different spaces. Then, where was the other side? It was very interesting. This is the true origin of the World Tree? Since transcending the universe of seekers, Eve's expression became serious for the first time. That's right. Professor nodded. Since the universe of heat death, Neo and I have never stopped studying the World Tree. Of course, we also studied the origin of the world tree. The more we learned about the world tree, the more we felt its mysteriousness and greatness. At the same time, we also deeply understood that such a majestic existence could never have appeared naturally in the universe of Blue Star. And finally, we accidentally discovered this wormhole. Through observation, Neo discovered a power of the same origin as the world tree in this wormhole. Unfortunately, this wormhole is very unstable, and the distorting power inside is too strong. Even Neo, who has become a great divine power in the universe of Seekers, couldn't enter. According to Neo's speculation, perhaps the world tree in the Blue Star universe was also distorted by the unknown power when it passed through this wormhole, and died as a result. This is also consistent with the remnants of laws and energy we found inside the world tree. Fortunately, according to our observation, perhaps due to the universe of heat death, the distorting power in this wormhole has weakened by about 97.43% compared to before the universe of heat death, and it will continue to weaken for a period of time in the future. According to Neo and my calculations, it will become a stable passage in the end. At that time, even the most ordinary cargo spaceship of the United Nations will be able to pass through safely. Of course, this will be a long time in the future. But before that, I think, you should have the ability to travel through it now. After all, Neo and I speculated that it was 10 million years ago. As for what will happen after traveling through it, we can't give an answer. The only thing we can be sure of is that on the other side of the wormhole, there are also advanced intelligent life forms. Advanced intelligent life forms? Eve's heart skipped a beat. That's right. Professor nodded. He looked at Eve and continued, "You're right. Your Holiness Eve, do you still remember the words in the Land of Origin?" Eve's heart skipped a beat as she recalled the records she read in the Land of Origin. She had never seen the words in the Land of Origin, but they had a magical power that allowed her to understand them. You mean, her expression was slightly solemn. That's right. It's just as you guessed. Those words came from Neo's observation of the energy escaping from the wormhole. This is proof of the existence of intelligent life forms, and they must be intelligent life forms that have come into contact with the power of laws. Professor nodded and said. At this point, it smiled faintly. Your Holiness Eve, this is Neo's gift for you. Your name is Eve. In English, this word means eve or night before. The night before, the stars are still dark, and dawn hasn't arrived yet. As early as when Neo discovered this wormhole, he realized that transcendence is actually just a starting point, a place that can give birth to a majestic existence like the world tree, and where the words that even a god like him can feel amazement exists must be a wider and more vast world. Of course, it's bound to be accompanied by more dangers. But at the same time, with more danger comes more opportunity. Although there's still a long way to go before dawn, it's actually just one night. After the night, dawn will eventually come, and we'll be greeted by an even more brilliant and glorious sun. Your Holiness Eve, your future depends on yourself. Awkward. I haven't finished writing. I have to write another chapter tomorrow. Your Majesty Eve, if you want to explore the wormhole, you'd better lock onto it as soon as possible because its coordinates are not fixed. Only after locking onto it can you track its changes. However, although it's unstable now, it will occasionally extend some temporary channels. Some weaker beings may be able to pass through at that time. Professor reminded her with a smile. Eve nodded gently. I understand. After learning the coordinates of the wormhole from Professor, Eve left the research hall. She inherited everything from Neo and became the new owner of the United Nations Research Center in Blue Star. Of course, she also became the new guardian of more than 7 billion United Nations survivors in Blue Star. In the end, she didn't refuse this identity, nor did she intend to refuse. Your Holiness Eve, may I be so bold as to ask? Next, what do you plan to do with the sleeping United Nations citizens? Standing at the entrance of the hall, Professor asked. I'll accompany them until the end of this illusory dream. Of course, after they wake up from the dream, they'll have to choose which path to take. Whether they choose humans or elves in the future, I won't interfere. This is all I can do. Although elves are new humans in Neo's eyes, in my eyes, they are completely different. Their existence is reasonable, so I won't make the choice for them. Eve said. Thank you, Your Majesty Eve. This is the best result, so I have no regrets. The illusory figure of Professor bowed respectfully to Eve. What about you? What's your plan next? I can sense that after billions of years of protection, your electronic signals have already undergone some kind of transformation and have already given birth to its own wisdom. Instead of calling you a super smart brain, it's better to call you a super artificial intelligence. Now that I've transcended, you don't have to continue to guard here. I see that your soul form is similar to an energy life form. Are you interested in accepting my divine blessing and becoming my subordinate demigod? After that, Eve looked at the professor from head to toe and asked, "What do you think?" As a god of creation, after she took over this place, she didn't need Professor to use the old system that was on the verge of collapse to maintain the daily maintenance. She planned to move everything here to the depths of her kingdom and hand it over to the fairy king, Fennel, to take care of. In this way, the task of Professor guarding would naturally end. However, after hearing Eve's words, Professor shook his head gently. He smiled slightly and said, "Your Majesty Eve, since you've accepted the task of guarding, then, my mission. The purpose of artificial intelligence is to fulfill its mission. To be able to see the citizens of the United Nations properly settled, my wish has been fulfilled. And there's no need for me to exist." Really? Don't you want to see how the people you have protected for billions of years are born and live in another world? Don't you want to intervene as a manager again and participate in the operation of another world? Eve asked. After hearing to Eve's to speak, Professor to Professor 2 for the first time, there was some doubt in his tone. "Your Majesty Eve, you know everything I've done. Don't you have any grudges in your heart?" Grudges? What's that? I admit that after knowing the truth, I'm a little displeased to see you, but, considering your identity, rather than being displeased, perhaps I'm more impressed. Eve shook her head and said. Eve was quite impressed with this artificial intelligence that had persisted for hundreds of millions of years. Although because of her standpoint, the other party's various actions were more like a villain in a novel, it was still because of her standpoint. As an artificial intelligence, as an intelligent program that adhered to the principles of its core program, what it did, was just what it should do. And Eve had always lacked resistance to this kind of existence that adhered to its original intention from beginning to end. The half-elf Orlos was like this, and the demigod guardian of the Sandstone tribe, Xianxia, was the same. Your Majesty Eve, what do you want me to do? Professor couldn't help but ask. Eve smiled and said, of course, continue to play the role of a guardian, but, in another world. As she spoke, she looked at the other party, and her deep purple eyes were full of smiles. How about it? Are you interested in leaving the category of artificial intelligence and becoming a real life? As for this, I can still do it. I have a position that might be very suitable for you. I don't know if you're interested in becoming one of the official operators of Elven Nation for the next 100 years? The official operator of Elven Nation, ? Professor was moved. As the super-artificial intelligence that controlled the virtual world of Blue Star, it was no stranger to the game created by Eve. Although it only saw this game from the memories of the Blue Star humans, its obvious expression showed that this super-artificial intelligence was not uninterested. It was silent for a moment, and finally smiled bitterly and slowly nodded. Your Majesty Eve, your proposal. I can't refuse. After leaving the research center, Eve kept everything here in her kingdom of God. Of course, she also kept Professor there. After that, she would officially create a real-life body for him. However, his appearance would definitely not be Professor anymore. After all, if they saw Star Guardian Rigdel suddenly become Eve's subordinate demigod, the gods of the universe of Seekers would probably be shocked. As the ruler of the new universe, and also the leader of the gods, no matter what, she had to take the gods' mentality into consideration. After settling Professor down, Eve planned to leave. But before she left, she met Fennel again. Fennel's expression was full of surprise, and under the surprise, there was a bit of a dilemma. Your Majesty, you came back just in time. Now that the game has encountered some trouble, how do you think we should deal with it? Eve raised her eyebrows. Is the change in the universe of Seekers causing dissatisfaction among the players? How did you know? That's right. That's it. The official website is about to explode. It's even more troublesome than the last time. Fennell was stunned for a moment and nodded repeatedly. It's okay. Go back and write a new explanation based on the previous announcement. The compensation will be doubled, and everyone will naturally pretend that nothing happened. Eve said without changing her expression. After that, under Fennell's stunned expression, her consciousness left the kingdom of God again. The destroyed universe of Blue Star. The vast divine power slowly calmed down. The decaying world tree floating in the galaxy, and the huge man-made building on the world tree were all gone. There was only a constantly rotating wormhole that was slowly opening in its original spot. That was the wormhole that Eve had completely opened up from the universe of Seekers to the universe of Blue Star. At this moment, the old world tree's body was stripped off by Eve, and even the internal dimensions of the universe of Seekers were all devoured by Eve, so, this universe that had reincarnated a total of 7 times was rapidly collapsing. Standing at the edge of the last galaxy in the universe of Blue Star after the heat death, one could see an incomparably magnificent scene. The rotating wormhole continued to enlarge and gradually revealed Eve's true body, a majestic tree full of vitality. And everything in the universe of Seekers was also revealed. In the universe that no longer had dimensions, the power of the void exploded, the space was torn apart, and the energy of the void flowed backward like the heat-death universe, emitting a dense radiance. Like ink poured into water, the entire shattered universe began to rapidly distort and disintegrate, like bright fireworks in the dark night. Sacred radiance slowly rose, and the gods of the universe of Seekers finally rushed out. The 3 great divine powers, dragon ancestor Yulinos, death Hela, and ancient god Guai, who had regained his freedom, stood at the front. They stood in the silent darkness with their eyes wide open, looking at the disintegrating universe of Seekers in shock. Looking at the endless darkness outside the universe of Seekers, their eyes were full of shock. This is the world outside the universe of Seekers? Yeleno's eyes widened, her eyes full of surprise, as if she had not expected the outside of the universe to be like this. Ancient god Guai released his soul perception, and a moment later, his eyes became more solemn. No boundary. I can't feel the boundary of space. It's very similar to the land of origin. This is more like a vast universe that has long withered. Death Hela did not speak, but her gaze fell on Eve, as if waiting for Eve's answer. Most gods were the same. The universe of Seekers had been destroyed, and the World Tree universe was officially formed. At this moment, Eve, who had become a god of creation, was the master of the universe and the only leader of the gods. That's right, this is the world outside the universe of Seekers. It's also a wider universe. At the same time, it's also the universe where the Creator is. As everyone can see, this universe has long ended. Eve said slowly. She did not intend to tell the gods about the Blue Star United Nations. This could be considered a little selfish of hers. After all, the matter of the Blue Star United Nations was ultimately related to her origins. Everything in the past had disappeared with the destruction of the universe of Seekers. The most important thing was the future. Of course, she did not deliberately hide it. Perhaps when the time was right, she would reveal the secrets of the Blue Star universe's past. Perhaps when the day came when someone from the Blue Star became a god, everything would be revealed on its own. Or perhaps one day in the future, the gods of the universe of Seekers would find the answer themselves, but not now. It's over. Is this place over too? Ancient god Guai was stunned and muttered to himself. I thought it would be an exciting world, but I didn't expect it to be like this. Yulinos looked at the dead universe, her eyes filled with disappointment. Death Hela stretched out her hand and sensed it. She shook her head gently. There's no power here. Void power, law power, nothing, of course not. After the heat death, the universe was nothingness. Naturally, nothing existed. To be able to stand here, the gods had to be thankful that the law power they had grasped was strong enough. Your Holiness Eve, what should we do next? Among the gods, a god could not help but ask. For a moment, all the mythical creatures turned their attention to Eve. Including the 3 powerful gods, ancient god Guai. Under the gazes of the gods, Eve slowly raised her head and looked into the distance. She was looking in the direction of the wormhole coordinates that the professor had told her. Of course, we have to continue forward. After transcending, I also learned some information. This is not the end. As she spoke, she used her divine power and projected the image on the electronic screen in front of the gods again. This is a space channel? Looking at the wormhole that Eve had created, the gods' expressions changed. That's right. Eve nodded slowly. She looked into the distance again. This is a channel ahead. It should be connected to another world. As she spoke, she paused slightly and sighed. That place is very likely the true home of the World Tree. The true home of the World Tree. The gods were slightly moved. They could not help but glance at Eve's main body. Their expressions showed some interest. Although they felt that Eve's words were a little strange, they had to admit that this instantly aroused their enthusiasm for exploration. By now, all the myths of the universe of Seekers knew that the World Tree came from outside the universe. Then, where the World Tree was born, what kind of world would it be? Seeing how tempted the gods were, Eve smiled and said with some mischievousness, "Don't worry. Everyone, transcending is not the end, but the eve of the journey. The eve, the starry sky is still dark, and dawn has not yet arrived. A place that can give birth to the World Tree must be a wider and more vast world. Of course, it must be accompanied by more dangers. But at the same time, with more danger comes more opportunity. Although the eve is still a long way from dawn, in fact, it is only one night. After the night, dawn will finally come. What will greet us will be an even more brilliant and glorious sun. Everyone, the road ahead, can only rely on ourselves." After inspiring the fighting spirit of the gods to continue moving forward, Eve took the lead and flew to the location of the coordinates. According to the coordinates provided by Professor, she had already used her powerful perception after transcending to lock on to the other party. She found that this wormhole was more unstable than she had imagined. She did not know what would greet her on the other side of the wormhole. It might be a universe similar to the Blue Star universe, but more magical and vast. It might also be a more mysterious and magnificent world beyond Eve's imagination. However, Eve believed that what awaited her was not a hopeless future. Because if she guessed correctly, it was very likely that someone in the universe of Seekers had already entered the world behind the wormhole before her. That was the elves of the Thunder tribe whose whereabouts had yet to be found. In the records found by Eve, they had passed through a mysterious passage and left the universe of Seekers. Perhaps, it happened to be a secret passage derived from the wormhole. Eve believed that perhaps a long, long time later, she would meet them again. She was looking forward to their expressions when they saw her at that time. Transcending was only the starting point. The path that belonged to Eve had just begun. The end of the book. My name is Doreen, Doreen's Shadow. My mother told me that my father searched for my name in the Elvish language for 3 days and 3 nights before finally deciding on it. In the Elvish language, this name means hope and also the gift of the goddess. My father was a devout believer of the goddess, and he was also a powerful ranger who was well known far and wide. Ever since I could remember, there had always been visitors to my father's house. Every time they visited, they would bring a lot of fun and delicious gifts. I still remember before we moved, I was still living with my parents in the city of Heaven's Chosen. It was the largest and most spectacular city in the world. There were towering towers and flying magic trains everywhere. At that time, almost every day, there would be new guests visiting my father day and night, which even gave him a headache. The deepest impression was my father's lack of sleep for a long time. His eyes were always bloodshot and heavy dark circles, as well as his helpless expression when he was woken up in the middle of the night by knocking on the door. I clearly remember my dad sighing and complaining to my mom more than once. He said that these shameless guys didn't even give him time to rest. Even if he deducted favorability, there would still be new people coming to look for trouble every day. However, at this time, my mother would only chuckle. She would always cover her mouth, gazing at my father with affectionate eyes while smiling gently and teasingly. Now do you understand our difficulties? When we first met, you also knocked on my door in the middle of the night. Every time this happened, my father would be speechless. He would scratch his head while awkwardly changing the topic with his stiff conversational skills. At that time, weren't you still immature? Later, I changed. Oh, are you hungry? I'll cook some noodles for you. My father's noodles were delicious. After all, it was the only food my father knew how to cook. noodles weren't the traditional food of the Elvish tribe. According to my mother, it was brought by the Chosen from a very distant place. The Chosen have a very high status in the Elvish tribe. They have powerful strength and the miraculous ability to come back from the dead. It is said that it is the proof of the goddess' divine favor. My mother told me that my father was once a powerful Chosen from the Elvish tribe. When I first learned about this, I was shocked. For as long as I could remember, the stories of the Chosen Ones were often discussed among my friends. They were the protagonists that the bards loved to recount the most. They went on adventures in one dimension after another. Everyone yearned for the legendary experience of the Chosen Ones. So, Dad also has the miraculous power to come back from the dead? At that time, I kept asking. No, he doesn't anymore. He is retired from his job as a Chosen One. My mother gently stroked my head and replied. Retired? Yes. Why? Because Dad is tired. Every Chosen One will be tired. And when they are tired, they will retire. Oh, at that time I didn't quite understand. Of course, I later found out that it was because the Chosen Ones were living in another distant world. When they died in that world, they would lose their Chosen One status. Death, to the family in that world, it must be a very sad thing. When I found out about this, I couldn't help but feel sad. However, his father shook his head. No, compared to sadness, to me, death is more like a new beginning. That day, I found out that most of the Chosen Ones actually had 3 lives. In that distant world, they lived as ordinary people. That was the first life. In our world, they continued to adventure, fight, and explore the unknown. That was the second life. When they died in another world, the memories of that world would also be forgotten. At that time, most of them would start their third life as ordinary elves. Later, we moved. We moved from the city of Chosen to a manor in the countryside. The reason was simple. My father really couldn't stand the waves of Chosen Ones. I still remember the day before we finally decided to move. My father dragged his tired body, mentally, home from the guard station. Once again, he complained to my mother that the new Chosen Ones were too clingy and couldn't be driven away. My mother shook her head and said that she went to the temple to pray today. She heard from the priests that the goddess had recently given an oracle that the number of new Chosen Ones seemed to be increasing. My father's face turned green on the spot. The next day, he moved us to the countryside. Our new home was located next to a beautiful lake in the suburbs. That lake had a moving name, Amber. Even today, 30 years later, the beautiful scenery of the lakeside manor still intoxicated me. He could still remember the day he moved in. The continuous drizzle had washed the lush and verdant trees until they were green and shiny. The cheerful chirping of birds resounded in the forest. The cool September wind made the miscanthus sway left and right. The cloudless sky was blue and clear. The wind blew across the lake, bringing with it the unique fresh air after the rain. The sparkling lake rippled, reflecting the rustling leaves of the green willows. Occasionally, I could hear the long howl of a megalosaurus from the depths of the forest. That sound was a bit vague, as if it came from another world. I couldn't help but imagine what the hometown of the Chosen Ones was like. The manor was very big. Flowers and green grass were planted everywhere. My new bedroom was 4 times bigger. The soft bed was enough for me to roll around alone. My father also specially asked Lady Alice to set up a magic barrier outside the manor. After that, the number of Chosen Ones who came to disturb us decreased greatly. The remaining Chosen Ones, rather than being attracted by the fame, were more like my father's friends. Later, I learned that they were my father's teammates when he was a Chosen One. Every time they visited, they would bring me all kinds of interesting gifts, beautiful flowers from other dimensions, and all kinds of exotic delicacies. I also especially liked listening to them talk about their adventures when they visited my father. Their adventures were even more exciting than the stories her mother had told her about her father's adventures. It was a journey through various planes, and every journey was enough to write a legend. They even went to places even further away. It was said that it was a wider and more magnificent world. My father also liked to listen to them talk about their experiences. Whenever they excitedly talked about their adventures, my father would quietly listen to them, his eyes full of light. At that time I realized that although my father was no longer a chosen one, in his heart, he still longed for adventure. I once asked my father, although he was no longer a chosen one, it was said that there were many ordinary elves who went on adventures with chosen ones. Why didn't he continue his journey? My father gently replied, because I already have you and my mother. At that moment, I understood that in my father's heart, there was already something more important than adventure. My father used to have 4 chosen ones comrades. Although in my opinion, they were as amiable as the uncles next door, my friends enviously told me that each of them was a legendary figure in the world. Among them, I liked the optimistic uncle the most. He always wore the simplest armor. Every time he saw me, he would smile gently and give me delicious milk candies. He also had a megalosaurus companion named Christine. She was a beautiful blonde sister. Sister Christine was very beautiful, but, because the growth period of a megalosaurus was too long, she looked slightly older than me. Although she was a little arrogant, she was surprisingly gentle. We became good friends from the first day we met. Occasionally, she would visit me alone, transform into a megalosaurus, and soar in the sky with me. Uncle Optimist often said to me enviously that Christine treated me better than he did. However, I knew that Kristen liked her optimistic uncle very much. Although she always bickered with Uncle Optimist, and although she always put on an arrogant and disdainful face in front of him, whenever Uncle Optimist was by her side, her gaze would always follow him. Although it was hidden very deeply, I was no stranger to that gaze. It had the gentleness of a mother looking at my father. Uncle Optimist and a few other friends would visit me at least once every 4 years. And the chosen time was often a fixed day in autumn. That seemed to be a special day. Although they would visit me alone or as a group, it was never as grand as that day. However, I didn't like the atmosphere of the special day. Although they brought the most gifts on that day, and the smiles on their faces were the brightest, I always felt that, when the day came, they seemed to be hiding their sadness. However, my father was the complete opposite. Although he always had an expressionless face, I felt that his mood was unprecedentedly happy every time he was on special days. It seemed that watching his chosen ones hide their sadness with smiles was the happiest thing for him. This made me very puzzled. It was only later that I learned from my mother that this day was the day my father died in another world. The flow of time in the other world was 1/4 of our world, so, that was the anniversary of my father's death every year in the other world. Don't they know that my father is just continuing to live in this world? I asked curiously. My mother replied with a strange expression, actually, your father has already explained many times, but, they never believed it. Why? Because every reincarnated chosen one will have their memories of the other world sealed. Without the memories of the other world, they don't believe that your father is truly reincarnated. If it's not reincarnation, then what is it? In their words, it's a memorial NPC. NPC. It's the person who gives missions to the chosen ones. Is my mother also an NPC? Sort of. I still didn't understand much about the chosen ones. Everything about them seemed to be incompatible with this world. But at the same time, without them, this world seemed to be missing something. There seemed to be a deep misunderstanding between them and my father that couldn't be resolved. However, my father didn't seem to care. They will know sooner or later. He said so. At that time, I still didn't know what my father meant. However, at that time, I could vaguely feel some loneliness from my father. Until today, the sun outside the window was still bright and beautiful. The living room welcomed guests that hadn't been seen in a long time. I carefully opened the curtains and quietly looked at the 2 people sitting in the hall. On one side was my father, and on the other side was the optimistic uncle. They sat on both sides. In the fireplace, the bonfire crackled. The light flickered, and the atmosphere in the living room was strange. My father seemed to be holding back his laughter, and the optimistic uncle was a little embarrassed. He sat upright, his face was full of awkwardness, and even his ears were a little red. No one spoke. Both of them were very quiet, but they seemed to have something to say. Suddenly, they looked up at the same time and wanted to say something, but after looking at each other, they subconsciously closed their mouths at the same time. In the end, my father couldn't hold it in anymore and suddenly burst out laughing. My father rarely laughed. At that moment, I almost thought that I was seeing things. Something that could make my father laugh must be extremely interesting. Optimist, you go first. No, no, no. Captain, you go first. You go first. No, boxed lunch bro, you go first, then I'll go first? My father smiled, and the optimistic uncle became more and more embarrassed. How did you die? You should be very young in reality, right? My father suddenly asked. It's embarrassing to say, it was a car accident. The optimistic uncle scratched his head. Car accident? It should be. I can't remember clearly what happened in Blue Star. This is what I heard from Lord Adagor in the Kingdom of God. Adagor? It's a new demigod of the goddess. Did you see the goddess? It's a pity, but I didn't. Then now, do you know that what I have been saying about reincarnation is true? Now I know. Soon, I saw my father and the optimistic uncle fall into silence at the same time. They looked at each other and suddenly burst out laughing at the same time. I have never seen my father laugh so happily before. Ha ha ha. Optimist, from today onwards, you will also experience the happiness of an NPC. Of course, there is also the worship that happens once every 4 years. He laughed. Looking at my father's carefree smile, I suddenly realized that from today onwards, he might not occasionally show a lonely expression like before. Maple Moon Free Territory, capital of Zaloran. The Parliament building in the Freedom Square was brightly lit and filled to the brim. In the square outside the building, a huge crystal screen projected the scene of the venue. There was a sea of people in the square. All the citizens turned their gazes to the solemn platform in the Parliament building. Today was a special day. Maple Moon Free Territory, known as the Light of Life, welcomed the 80th anniversary of its independence. At the same time, it was also the day of the official election of Maple Moon Free Territory's governor. In the venue, representatives from all walks of life gathered together, dressed in dignified attire. Their gazes were focused on the elegant and beautiful figure on the rostrum with respectful expressions. Sophia von Weers. She was the founder of Maple Moon Free Territory, the great leader of freedom, and the saintess of life of the human world. At the same time, she was the most admired person of all the young men and women in Maple Moon Free Territory. Today, she was wearing a white dress, which made her look even more beautiful and noble. She held a magic microphone in one hand and a golden scroll in the other. With a smile on her face, her elegant and pleasant voice resounded in the air above the venue. Next, I announce, according to the final voting results, Mr. Blake Schwartz, a city governor from Ore City, has been elected the 21st Maple Moon Free Territory's chief governor with 77.5% of the votes. Let us congratulate Mr. Blake Schwartz with a warm round of applause. As soon as she finished speaking, deafening applause resounded in the hall, in the square, and in the sky above Maple Moon Free Territory. The representatives stood up one after another and congratulated Blake Schwartz, who was sitting at the front of the stage. Blake Schwartz was a middle-aged gentleman who looked to be about 50 years old. His hair was slightly white. He looked excited, and there was a hint of absent-mindedness in his eyes. Sophia turned her gaze to him. She revealed a teasing smile and said, "Looks like our new governor isn't ready yet." Ha 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 ha, there was a burst of laughter below the stage. Sophia stretched out her hand and gestured slightly. The Parliament hall instantly quieted down. She picked up the microphone again and said with a smile, "Mr. Blake Schwartz has 30 years of experience in governing. He has served as the governor of Creekwood City, Limestone Harbor, Ore City, and many other regions. His achievements are remarkable. Under his management, Creekwood Town officially became a city, Limestone Harbor's population tripled, and Ore City developed into the brightest new city in the entire territory. I believe that under his leadership, our Maple Moon Free Territory will create even more glorious achievements." After he finished speaking, another round of applause rang out in the hall. Sophia looked at Blake Schwartz again and gave him an encouraging smile. "Mr. Blake Schwartz, please come to the podium." All eyes were on Blake Schwartz. At this moment, the middle-aged gentleman had already regained his composure. However, the slightly moist corners of his eyes indicated that his heart might not be as calm as it seemed. He took a deep breath, stood up from his seat, and solemnly tidied his clothes. Then, he walked toward the high platform nervously. Halfway through, he almost tripped and fell, causing another round of laughter. "Slow down. Don't get too excited," Sophia said with a smile. Blake was greatly embarrassed and scratched his head in embarrassment. After he stood properly, a uniformed guard came in front of Sophia and presented a tray with both hands. On the tray, a badge with a golden scepter symbol was lying quietly on a red base. That was the symbol of the chief governor of Maple Moon Free Territory. Sophia gently picked up the badge and stood on her tiptoes to put it on for Blake. As she put it on, she could not help but sigh. "I still remember the first time I saw you. You were still a child crying in the corner of the orphanage, introverted and timid. I didn't expect that after 40 years, the youth of the past would finally grow into a leader who can lead the entire Maple Moon Free Territory forward. This is all thanks to you, Lady Sophia. If not for your inspection, if not for your order to let everyone in the orphanage receive free education, I wouldn't have achieved what I have today." Blake became agitated again and spoke respectfully. "No, this is your own effort. I only provided an environment and opportunity." Sophia shook her head and smiled. After saying that, she extended her hand and handed the microphone to Blake. "I'll leave the rest to you. I think, you must have a lot to say to everyone." "Thank you. Thank you," Blake spoke respectfully and excitedly. "Do your best, my junior. The future of Maple Moon Free Territory is in your hands." Sophia patted him on the shoulder. After handing over the microphone and badge, she slowly walked down the rostrum. On the rostrum, Blake took a deep breath, calmed down, and began his speech. "Today, I'm very honored to be elected as the 21st Chief Governor of Maple Moon Free Territory." Sophia glanced at the rostrum again and smiled before quietly leaving the venue. Outside the venue, the temperature was cooler than inside. Today's weather was very clear. The sky was high and the clouds were light. The azure sky seemed to have been washed, deep and enchanting. In the square outside the building, an endless crowd of people had gathered. They were cheering and holding up signs with Blake's name, looking excited. Seeing this scene, Sophia muttered to herself for a moment before changing her direction and walking toward a remote street. It was very easy for a gold professional to deliberately avoid the sight of mortals. Sophia crossed the street without alarming anyone. Decades had passed, and Maple Moon Free Territory had developed more and more prosperous. The capital, Zaloran, had also undergone earth-shaking changes. The buildings grew taller and taller with each passing year, magic became more and more popular, and the streets of the city became cleaner and cleaner with each passing year. Looking at the rapidly changing territory, Sophia's gaze was full of emotion. 80 years had passed in the blink of an eye. It seemed like the day of the revolution was only yesterday. "Aren't you going to continue participating in the rest of the celebration?" An old voice came from behind her. Sophia did not seem surprised, or rather, she had already sensed the other party's appearance. She gently turned her head and looked behind her with a smile. "Fane, aren't you the same?" Behind her was an old priest with a head full of silver hair. If the life priests of Maple Moon Free Territory were here, they would definitely salute him respectfully because he was none other than the chief priest of the Life Church in Maple Moon Parish. Hearing Sophia's words, the old priest sighed softly. "I'm old. I'll get tired after a long meeting, so I wanted to come out for a walk." "Tell me the truth," Sophia said with a faint smile. Looking at her penetrating gaze, the old priest had a helpless expression. "All right, I saw you come out, so I followed you to take a look." "Me? My mission has been completed. Naturally, I don't need to continue staying there. The stage should be handed over to the newcomers." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "Are you really not going to consider continuing your term?" The old priest had a helpless expression. "I have to give the young people a chance." Sophia shook her head. The old priest was silent for a moment before saying, "But you have to know that no one has a higher reputation than you. If you participate in the election, you'll definitely be re-elected. And, you know that everyone welcomes your re-election." "But I've been re-elected for too long," Sophia shook her head again. She looked at the sky, her gaze drifting to an unknown place. After a long time, she slowly retracted her gaze and sighed. When I first became a consul, my plan was to only work for 8 years. When everything was on the right track, I would retire. In the end, 8 years later, another 8 years later, and another 8 years after that. Now, it's been 80 years. As she spoke, Sophia smiled bitterly. It's been too long. It's been too long. Even the liberators who fought with me have passed away one after another. Now, it's just you and me. Hearing Sophia's words, the old man's expression also had a hint of emotion. Yes. It's been 80 years. I still remember when the cultists wreaked havoc in the territory. I was still a militia that was forcefully conscripted by the fallen nobles. I didn't know where the future lay. At that time, I probably would never have imagined that I would become the manager of a parish. If it wasn't for the power of faith that allowed me to become a high-level transcendent, I'm afraid that I would have turned into dirt decades ago, just like my comrades. As he spoke, his gaze landed on Sophia, and he sighed. But, it's been 80 years, but you don't seem to have changed much. You're still so young, so beautiful, and so noble. Of course, I'm a half-elf. Although my lifespan can't compare to a true elf, it's still more than 10 times that of an ordinary human. Sophia sighed. I'm getting old. Recently, I keep feeling that I can't see as clearly as before. I'm probably seeing things wrongly. The old man smiled. Hearing his words, Sophia raised her head and looked at him with a complicated gaze. Her gaze swept across the old man's wrinkled face, and she nodded. Yes, you're old. Now, you look like an old willow bark. The old priest paused for a moment and said helplessly, Lady Sophia, you're still so sarcastic, ha 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 ha. Sophia laughed out loud. A moment later, the two of them quieted down. Sophia looked at the people coming and going on the streets in the distance and gradually fell into a daze. After a long time, the old priest couldn't help but speak again. Are you planning to leave Maple Moon Free Territory? Sophia fell silent. Where are you going? You're the lighthouse in people's hearts. If you're gone, I'm afraid many people will be sad. The old priest continued to ask. Sophia shook her head. But even I can't guard the territory for the rest of my life. My mission has been completed. The rest should be handed over to the newcomers. Letting go will allow them to grow better. As for me, Sophia paused for a moment and shook her head. I don't know yet. Maybe. I'll travel the world. After saying that, she didn't continue. However, her gaze was quietly looking at the streets in the distance. However, although she was looking at the streets, her distant gaze seemed to be looking even further away. Are you waiting for someone? The old priest suddenly asked. Why do you say that? I've more or less heard some rumors. Why haven't you gotten married? They're just rumors. They can't be considered true. But I know that you've been maintaining correspondence with the Elven Forest. Every month, you'll receive and send letters. On your birthday, you'll even quietly smile at the gift from the Amway Chamber of Commerce. You're spying on me? No. Lady Sophia, this is no longer a secret among the higher-ups. The only one who doesn't realize that everyone already knows is you. Sophia was speechless. However, if I remember correctly, you haven't received any new letters for a long time. The person you're waiting for, will he really come? The old priest asked. Hearing his words, Sophia's gaze became a little confused. I don't know. However, I want to wait a little longer. Looking at her somewhat blurred vision, the old priestess sighed. I understand. After saying that, he looked at the sky and said, It's late. It's getting late. I should return to the venue. You look a little tired. Don't stay outside for too long. After saying that, the old priest left. Sophia was left alone on the street, looking at the distant scenery in a daze. The conference ended soon after. The sun gradually set in the west, and the crowd gathered in the square also gradually dispersed. Soon, dusk arrived. Sophia stood alone at the end of the street. Her shadow was very long in the dim light of the street. At this moment, she didn't look like a retired consul. She looked more like a lonely young girl. She stood there for a long time, however, she didn't see the figure she wanted to see. Gradually, the last ray of sunlight disappeared from the horizon. Sophia's expression also faded into the darkness. She sighed deeply and turned to leave. However, just as she took a step forward, a somewhat cynical voice came from behind her. "Hey! This beautiful lady. I heard that you just quit your job. It just so happens that I have an excellent job here that needs someone to do. I wonder if you're interested?" Sophia trembled slightly when she heard that familiar voice. She stopped and didn't turn around. Instead, she asked in a trembling voice, "What job?" Cough cough, "I opened a small chamber of commerce and now I'm lacking a manager. I heard that you're very good at management. I wonder if you're interested?" That cynical voice asked. Sophia smiled. However, there seemed to be something sparkling in front of her eyes. "No. I don't want to. I'm tired and don't want to manage anymore. That's too much of a coincidence. The manager I want doesn't need to manage too many things. She only needs to manage one person." That voice continued. "What does she want to manage?" Sophia asked back. "Manage me," the other party said frivolously. Sophia trembled and slowly turned around. She saw that familiar figure looking at her with a smile. "Sorry. I'm late. I went to a very, very far place in the past few years. After knowing that you went into seclusion, I rushed over with great difficulty." That person scratched his head and said apologetically. Sophia pursed her lips when she heard this. "What's my relationship with you? Why did you rush back? What relationship? What relationship are you talking about? Is there anyone in this world who doesn't know about our relationship? At least, I don't know." "No way. My dear princess. What happened to our many years of friendship? You haven't contacted me for many years. I'm really sorry. I really went to a very far place, farther than all the previous planes. I can tell you in detail later. It was an even more exciting adventure. Who wants to hear about your adventure?" "Ah, this, isn't it? You. Looking at the other party's uneasy expression, Sophia burst into laughter. "Alright, I won't tease you anymore." Saying so, her gaze instantly became gentle. "Can you repeat what you said earlier?" The figure on the other side was taken aback, but quickly reacted. He made a gentlemanly bow and extended his hand to Sophia. "My beautiful princess, my chamber of commerce lacks a manager. Are you interested in leaving with me?" "Of course." Sophia's tears glistened, but she smiled blissfully and extended her hand. Mr. Dalmatia. End of chapter 982. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share the video to support the channel.